The pistol stopped inches from Malcolm Avery's cheek before the bronze state sedan had finished ticking behind him. He stood beside the restricted loading lane of the Marlow County Evidence Annex, one hand visible and the other holding a slim leather credential case. Across the wet pavement, 3 gray evidence boxes rolled toward a side door on a freight cart. Each carried a strip of bright blue sealing tape. The inventory photographs in Malcolm's briefcase showed red seals. "Put it down," Sergeant Wade Kessler ordered. Malcolm lowered the credential case carefully. "My name is Malcolm Avery. I'm with the State Performance Audit Division. My visit was confirmed yesterday." Kessler's gaze moved from Malcolm's dark suit to the unmarked sedan, then to the locked briefcase near his shoe. He did not look at the state emblem stamped into the open credential case. "You expect me to believe they sent you?" The question landed with a meaning Kessler did not bother to hide. Malcolm had heard that tone in county offices before, the quiet disbelief that a black man could hold authority without borrowing it from someone else. Usually he answered with patience, documentation, and enough silence to make the other person hear himself. A gun changed the mathematics. "Call the number printed beneath my photograph," Malcolm said. "The visitor desk also has my authorization." Behind the glass doors, an older property clerk rose from her workstation. Ruth Delgado had confirmed the appointment herself. Malcolm saw recognition cross her face, followed by alarm when Kessler glanced back at her. She stopped with her hand above the door release. The freight cart kept moving. Malcolm turned his head just enough to follow it. One box had a torn barcode label beneath the new tape. He had arrived 18 minutes before the audit team because Ruth's guarded message the previous night had mentioned an unscheduled morning transfer. Waiting for his second auditor would have protected the protocol. Arriving alone, he had believed, might protect Ruth. "Eyes on me," Kessler snapped. "Those boxes are covered by a state preservation notice." Kessler crossed the distance in 3 strides. He kicked the credential case away, seized Malcolm's left arm, and drove him chest first onto the hood. Cold metal struck Malcolm's ribs. The pistol remained close enough that he could smell gun oil. "You don't issue orders here." Malcolm kept both palms flat. "I'm not resisting." Kessler wrenched one wrist behind him. The first cuff closed high against the joint. Pain flashed through Malcolm's thumb as the second arm was pulled back. He forced himself not to twist, knowing any movement could be rewritten before he ever saw the report. 2 uniformed officers emerged from the loading bay. One took Malcolm's briefcase. The other retrieved his credential case without opening it. "Possible forged state identification," Kessler said. "Restricted site trespass. Suspicious. Locked. Container." He was building the accusation aloud, so everyone nearby would inherit the same version. "Sergeant," Ruth called through the glass. "He was scheduled." Kessler looked toward her. "Go back to your station, Miss Delgado." The cart vanished through the side door. A steel latch slammed behind it. Malcolm tested the feeling in his fingers. His right thumb answered with a dull pulse. The left tingled and faded. He had missed the secure check-in on his state phone, now lying face down beneath Kessler's boot. Inside the annex, the front desk telephone began to ring. Kessler tightened his grip on Malcolm's shoulder and pointed toward the basement entrance. "Take him downstairs. Move the rest of those boxes now." The younger officer hesitated before touching Malcolm. The telephone rang a 3rd time, sharp and unanswered, inside the glass lobby. Ruth looked from Kessler to the receiver, then pushed through the security door despite his warning. "Evidence annex," she said. Her posture changed as she listened. She covered the mouthpiece. "It's the Attorney General." Kessler gave a short laugh. "Sure it is. She's asking for Mr. Avery." The officer holding Malcolm's briefcase lowered it slightly. Kessler did not lower his weapon until a lieutenant came through the loading bay, fastening the front of his uniform jacket. Benjamin Cross was younger than Kessler but carried the careful stillness of someone accustomed to walking into problems already shaped by another man's words. "What happened?" Cross asked. Imposter inside the restricted perimeter, Kessler said, possibly targeting evidence. Ruth extended the receiver. Attorney General Claire Roswell is on the state switchboard callback line. Cross took the call, asked for a verification code, then used his own phone to contact the published number for the Attorney General's office. Malcolm remained bent over the sedan, while the second call passed through 3 operators. Rain gathered along his jaw and dropped onto the hood. His left hand had gone nearly numb. Cross finally faced him. The office confirms you're a state auditor assigned to an active contract review. That doesn't explain why he was wandering around early, Kessler said. Malcolm heard the opening in those words. Kessler knew an appointment existed. He was no longer arguing that Malcolm's identity was false, only that his arrival was inconvenient. Cross ordered the cuffs removed and told both loading bay officers to stop moving property. Kessler complied slowly, releasing the left cuff last. Deep red bands circled Malcolm's wrists. When he tried to close his hand, his thumb trembled instead. "Nobody opens the briefcase," Malcolm said. "Nobody touches those boxes. Record their present locations." Cross nodded to one officer, but Kessler stepped between them. "He contaminated the loading area before we detained him. We're documenting everything." Malcolm wanted to challenge him immediately. For 23 years, numbers had been the one language institutions could not intimidate him out of speaking. He could spot a duplicated invoice hidden across hundreds of payments or reconstruct a missing shipment from the gaps between routine entries. At home, Amina teased him for checking grocery receipts before putting them in the recycling. At work, the same habit had saved towns from paying twice for ambulances, road salt, and courthouse repairs. This audit had begun with warehouse charges rising while the number of stored items fell. Ruth's discrepancy reports should have triggered corrections. Instead, they had vanished from the county's monthly submissions. But Malcolm had also broken his own division's paired entry rule. He had come early without his second auditor because Ruth's message sounded frightened and because he had decided that fewer people meant less danger for her. Now Kessler had a procedural fact. He could bend around the truth. Paramedics examined Malcolm beside the sedan. They found swelling across both wrists and reduced sensation in his left thumb, then fitted him with a temporary brace. Cross returned Malcolm's credential case but sealed the state phone and briefcase in separate property bags pending instructions from state counsel. Malcolm borrowed Ruth's desk phone to call Amina. He told her he was safe before admitting a gun had been pointed at him. Silence held the line long enough for him to hear children passing through the hallway of the middle school where she worked. "You went alone again," she said. There was fear beneath the anger, and Malcolm had no honest defense. Before the ambulance doors closed, Attorney General Roswell called back. The site was under formal preservation, she told Cross, but Malcolm would be removed from field activity until his early arrival and evidence contact were reviewed. Across the loading lane, Kessler watched the ambulance pull away while dictating the first sentence of his incident report. At the hospital, a physician ruled out fractures but ordered Malcolm to keep the brace on for several days and return if the numbness spread. A nurse photographed both wrists for his medical record. The cuffs had left dark crescents beneath his skin, and every attempt to button his shirt sent a thin current into his left thumb. Amina arrived before the discharge papers. She was still wearing the navy cardigan and staff badge from Briar Glen Middle School. She kissed Malcolm once, checked his hands, then sat beside the bed without taking off her coat. "When were you going to tell me Ruth contacted you? After I knew whether her warning was real. A man put a gun against your face. It was real before you proved anything." Malcolm looked at the plastic property bag containing his credential case. His phone and briefcase remained at the annex. Protecting Ruth had felt like discipline when he left home that morning. In Amina's voice, it sounded more like the old habit of deciding alone which dangers his family was allowed to know. An attorney from the state audit office called before Malcolm was discharged. Marlow County had submitted Kessler's incident report, supported by short statements from the 2 loading bay officers. According to the report, Malcolm had entered before his authorized appointment window, ignored a marked boundary, concealed his identification, moved toward a locked container, and resisted being secured. Kessler also claimed Malcolm had touched one of the evidence boxes before officers intervened. The report never mentioned the credential case lying open on the pavement. It did not mention Ruth confirming the visit or Kessler asking why Malcolm had arrived early. Yet Malcolm's own deviation gave the account a structure strong enough to survive first review. His authorization began at 9. He had arrived 18 minutes before that time. He had been alone when state procedure required 2 auditors inside a police evidence perimeter. "They're converting a safety violation into probable cause," Malcolm said, "and the county prosecutor has requested an obstruction review," the attorney replied. "No charge has been approved, but until we establish what you touched and when, you cannot participate in the physical inventory." That restriction cut deeper than the cuffs. The physical count was where Malcolm's skill mattered most. He had designed the reconciliation method himself. Match each serialized seal to the prior barcode scan, trace its recorded weight, then compare the storage invoice against the number of days the item had actually occupied space. A box could be relabeled. 4 independent entries were harder to move together. After Amina drove him home, Malcolm opened a read-only copy of the contract file on his state-issued laptop. Northline Secure Storage had billed Marlow County for overflow capacity that had nearly doubled in 8 months, even as closed cases reduced the county's evidence inventory. Sergeant Kessler had certified the monthly box totals. Deputy Chief Howard Sykes had approved the payments. Another document carried a more immediate deadline. The county board would consider Kessler for annex commander the following week, a promotion recommended by Sykes and justified partly by Northline's supposed efficiency. If the morning count revealed staged inventory, Kessler risked losing more than a title. His signed certifications could support an evidence-tampering referral and expose every payment authorized under them. Malcolm enlarged the inventory photographs. The red seal on the upper box had been scanned 2 days earlier. The blue strip he had seen on the freight cart belonged to a newer county batch. Someone had opened that box after the state image was captured. He called Ruth. Her work extension rang until the county voicemail system answered. Her personal number went directly to silence. An email from Lieutenant Cross arrived minutes later. The visitor desk export supplied by the annex showed no scheduled state auditor that morning. Cross had attached Kessler's supplemental statement, which now alleged that Malcolm might have created the appointment record himself using information obtained during previous audits. A second attachment ordered Ruth Delgado placed on administrative leave for allowing an unauthorized person near restricted evidence. Malcolm read that line twice. His decision to protect her had given Kessler the weapon used to isolate her. Then he reached the final sentence of the supplemental report. Until the county prosecutor completed its review, Malcolm's phone and briefcase would remain secured inside the same annex he had been sent to investigate. By the next morning, Kessler's account had escaped the incident file and entered the local news cycle. The police union issued a statement praising officers for stopping an unidentified man near sensitive evidence. It did not use Malcolm's name, but it described his age, clothing, sedan, and locked briefcase precisely enough that 2 reporters were waiting outside the Avery home before breakfast. Amina closed the curtains while Malcolm stood at the kitchen counter, trying to hold a coffee mug with both hands. The brace prevented his left wrist from bending, and the numbness in his thumb had spread into his palm overnight. A parent emailed the school asking if my husband was being investigated for stealing police evidence, she said. Malcolm set the mug down before he dropped it. The Attorney General's office will correct the record. When? He did not answer. State Counsel had instructed him to make no public statement while the obstruction referral was pending. The rule protected the audit, but it left Kessler's version uncontested. At the State Audit Division later that morning, Malcolm was assigned a small conference room instead of his office. His system access remained active, but his supervisor had restricted him to reviewing documents already collected before the incident. He could not contact county employees, direct the inventory team, or inspect any physical evidence. Attorney General Roswell, joined by secure video. Her expression carried none of the theatrical anger local commentators seemed to expect from the phone call in the annex. She spoke like a lawyer, protecting a case from the damage caused by urgency. "The county prosecutor has not approved charges," she said. "He also has not closed the referral. We have requested transfer of your phone and briefcase to a neutral state custodian. County counsel is objecting because Kessler listed both as suspected instrumentalities. My briefcase contains the pre-audit inventory images, which is why we cannot let anyone open it without an agreed protocol." Malcolm understood the caution. He still felt trapped by it. The evidence that could show why he had been targeted was locked inside a building controlled by the man who had targeted him. Lieutenant Cross had taken one protective step. He placed the 3 gray boxes in a restricted cage, requiring 2 different access credentials, and documented their blue seals without opening them. Kessler immediately filed a supplemental note claiming the boxes had been resealed during an ordinary internal transfer. Deputy Chief Sykes endorsed that explanation and warned that outside interference could compromise active criminal cases. The endorsement told Malcolm 2 things. Sykes was no longer merely the official who had approved Northline's invoices. He had chosen to attach his authority to Kessler's explanation, and both men needed the debate to remain focused on Malcolm's conduct instead of the storage contract. Malcolm reviewed his state email archive one-handed. Weeks earlier, Ruth had sent him 12 missing discrepancy numbers, not the forms themselves. The gaps matched months when Northline's storage charges rose most sharply. Her final message had contained no accusation, only a request that he verify the freight movement before the scheduled count. He opened the automatic calendar confirmation for the annex visit. At the bottom was a machine-generated visitor token, BGEA 44721. The token had been issued by the county terminal the previous afternoon, after Ruth entered Malcolm's name, division, arrival window, and vehicle description. County policy required the terminal to transmit that token to the visitor and retain the corresponding entry. Yet the export Cross received showed no appointment. Malcolm forwarded the original confirmation to State Counsel, preserving its full header rather than taking a screenshot. The message proved the entry once existed. It did not prove who removed it or whether the disappearance was deliberate. Kessler could argue that the terminal failed, Ruth entered the wrong date, or Malcolm's office generated the token independently. Still, it was the first fixed point in a story designed to move beneath his feet. An hour later, the county returned Malcolm's state phone through a neutral courier. Its screen was cracked, but the device powered on. His missed check-in remained visible. So did an automated security notice generated shortly after his detention. The annex visitor record associated with token BGEA 44721 had been modified by a supervisory account. The notice identified the account only as annex SUPV02. Malcolm reached for his notebook, then stopped. For years, his instinct had been to guard a fragile fact until he could prove the whole chain himself. That instinct had already cost Ruth her job and placed him alone beneath Kessler's gun. He called Amina first. He told her what he had found, what it did not yet prove, and what he intended to do next. Then he sent the untouched security notice to State Counsel and requested that Lieutenant Cross preserve every account authorized to use Annex SUPV02. Before the request left his outbox, Malcolm added one more line. No further field action should occur without a second auditor and an independent custodian present. The request to preserve Annex SUPV02 reached the county's software vendor before Marlow officials could narrow its scope. State Counsel sent the visitor token, the original email header, and the modification notice with an administrative subpoena issued under the existing public contract audit. The vendor confirmed receipt and froze the relevant change journal. 3 days later, Malcolm watched the first review session from behind a glass partition at the State Evidence Facility. He was present as a technical advisor, not as the physical auditor. His brace had been replaced by a softer support, but 2 fingers still tingled whenever he gripped a pen. Lieutenant Cross arrived carrying Malcolm's briefcase inside a tamper-evident transfer bag. County Counsel accompanied him. A state custodian photographed the seal, recorded each signature in the transfer chain, and opened the bag only after every person approved the procedure. The county attorney objected when Malcolm identified the briefcase combination. "Mr. Avery created these materials," she said. "His unsupervised arrival is under review." "Creation is not custody," Malcolm replied. "The state system recorded the files before I traveled to Briar Glen. Compare them to the server copies." The custodian did exactly that. Inside the briefcase, each inventory photograph carried a printed barcode summary. The state server contained matching originals, uploaded 2 days before the incident. File hashes and upload records established that Malcolm could not have altered them after his detention. The upper gray box appeared in 6 photographs. Its red seal bore a serial number ending in 8826. Cross's loading bay photographs showed the same box identifier covered by blue tape from a county batch issued the morning Malcolm arrived. County Counsel repeated Kessler's explanation that the box had been opened during an authorized internal transfer. Malcolm pointed to the printed reconciliation sheet. "Then there should be a break seal entry, a witness signature, a replacement seal number, and a reason. Show us any one of them." The county's exported ledger contained none. Cross leaned closer to the images. Until then, his concern had centered on whether Kessler used excessive force against a verified state employee. Now he was looking at something larger. An evidence box had been opened without the mandatory trail, and Kessler had been moving it when the auditor assigned to find storage discrepancies arrived. The visitor system vendor, joined by encrypted conference line, its analyst authenticated token BGEA 44721 through the company's own delivery record. The token could only have been created after an authorized annex employee entered Malcolm's appointment into the county terminal. The record had remained active overnight. It was changed to cancelled 12 minutes after Kessler detained Malcolm. The analyst could not identify the person. Annex Sup 502 was a shared supervisory account permitted to edit visitor entries. A password alone would not distinguish among authorized users. The journal did establish that the terminal had not failed and Ruth had not entered the wrong date. Cross removed his glasses. "Then my original export was inaccurate because someone changed the record after we already had Mr. Avery in cuffs." It was not an accusation, but it was the first time a county officer had described the sequence without using Kessler's language. That afternoon, the county prosecutor declined the trespass and forged credential allegations. The obstruction question remained open because Kessler still claimed Malcolm had moved toward a sealed box and failed to obey commands. Attorney General Roswell issued a factual statement confirming Malcolm's appointment and stating that the contract audit would continue under independent custody. The correction appeared beneath headlines already several days old. Amina's school received fewer calls, but not none. Malcolm's field restriction also remained in place. His early solo arrival had not become proper merely because Kessler lied about it. At home, Malcolm placed the prosecutor's notice beside the medical instructions on the kitchen table. He had expected vindication to feel like a door opening. Instead, it felt like being allowed to stand outside a room where his work continued without him. Amina sat across from him. "You were right about the record. That doesn't put Ruth back at her desk." "No. But calling her without protection won't either." Malcolm nodded. Together, they drafted a request for independent whistleblower counsel to contact Ruth, leaving Malcolm out of the first conversation. It was slower than acting alone. It also gave Ruth a choice he had denied her when he rushed to the annex. The response came that evening through the attorney assigned to her. Ruth would meet, but only at a neutral location, and only if Malcolm attended with state counsel. Her message contained one additional sentence. They deleted the electronic forms, but I kept the carbon copies. Ruth chose a conference room inside the state ombudsman's building, a place with no Marlow County uniforms in the lobby and no cameras controlled by the annex. Her attorney sat beside her. State counsel took the opposite chair. Malcolm waited until Ruth nodded before joining them. She looked smaller without the blue property clerk jacket she had worn behind the glass, but not less certain. A bound book rested inside a clear document sleeve before her. "I owe you an apology," Malcolm said. "I decided arriving alone would protect you. I never asked whether that was the protection you wanted." Ruth studied his braced wrist. "I wanted you to bring a team. I wanted enough witnesses that Kessler couldn't make me the only person saying what happened." "You were right." The answer seemed to release something neither of them could afford to carry into the evidence review. Ruth pushed the sleeve toward her attorney, who documented the transfer before state counsel opened it. The book contained yellow carbon copies from triplicate discrepancy forms. Each page bore a pre-printed serial number, Ruth's initials, the box identifier, the seal replaced, and the reason given by the employee requesting the change. She had received the yellow copy under the annex's former procedure. When Deputy Chief Sykes ordered clerks to stop retaining them at their desks, Ruth placed her existing book with union grievance materials in a locked cabinet at home. "He called them clutter," she said. After that, the white originals went upstairs and disappeared from the monthly file. Malcolm did not touch the pages. He asked Ruth to explain the form before pointing to any entry, then had counsel compare the serial sequence with the numbers Ruth had emailed weeks earlier. All 12 gaps were present. Pressure marks from the original writing remained visible beneath the ink, and several slips carried receiving stamps from Northline Secure Storage. The forms did not prove theft or kickbacks. They proved that boxes billed as continuously stored off-site had returned to the county annex, been opened, resealed, and sent out again without appearing in the electronic ledger. One slip covered the gray box ending in 8,826. Ruth had recorded its red seal being broken 5 weeks earlier because the certified weight did not match Northline's return manifest. Kessler had signed the request. No replacement seal number appeared. "He told me he would enter it after the recount," Ruth said. Then Sykes collected the original. Using the dates on the carbon copies, the independent audit team narrowed its subpoena for the annex's door and freight elevator logs. The system vendor authenticated the exports directly. Every secure door required a personal badge. The elevator recorded the credential used, the originating floor, and the destination, but not who physically rode inside or what the car contained. Kessler's badge appeared on 9 of the 12 discrepancy dates. On 6, it opened the evidence cage shortly before the freight elevator descended to the loading bay. Sykes's badge appeared on 3 others. The morning Malcolm was detained, Kessler's badge opened the cage, called the elevator, and released the side loading door during the same period. The gray boxes crossed the pavement. The shared visitor account still could not identify who cancelled Malcolm's appointment. The personal access records did something different. They connected Kessler's physical credential to the precise movement his report described as ordinary. Lieutenant Cross reviewed the logs with state counsel. He confirmed that loading bay officers sometimes carried a supervisor's boxes but were not authorized to borrow a supervisor's badge. He also disclosed why the system had failed for so long. Monthly access reviews went to Sykes, who marked each exception as operationally justified without returning it to the evidence clerk for verification. By evening, Attorney General Roswell expanded the preservation demand to cover the contractor invoices, certified scale tickets, and payment batches already listed in the audit plan. Malcolm remained barred from physical fieldwork, but Roswell restored his authority to design the reconciliation and question records custodians with a second auditor present. It was not the return Malcolm had wanted. It was the first authority he accepted with conditions instead of treating conditions as doubt. Kessler adapted before the day ended. Through county counsel, He claimed the badge had been left in a shared command tray during busy transfers and accused Ruth of removing official records to fabricate a retaliation case. The police union requested that every state interview with annex staff be suspended until Ruth's conduct was investigated. Then, Northline's attorneys notified the state that the original certified scale tickets had been destroyed under the company's routine retention schedule. Malcolm read the notice twice. The carbon copies had opened a path to the warehouse scheme, but the people on the other side were already trying to close it. Northline had destroyed its paper scale tickets, but it had not controlled every copy. Marlow County's payment system required invoice support to be scanned before the Treasury released funds. Those images remained attached to the payment batches, already covered by the audit subpoena. Malcolm built the comparison with another auditor seated beside him. He called out each field while she entered it: box count, stated weight, storage dates, ticket number, approving officer, and payment amount. Their work moved slowly enough to be repeated and challenged. Every change remained visible in the audit file. The first irregularity appeared in a ticket attached to a payment from 7 months earlier. Its number matched a ticket submitted again 6 weeks later, but the second image carried a different date and a heavier load. Under magnification, the printed scale line remained identical, only the typed header had changed. They found 26 reused ticket numbers across 18 months. Malcolm overlaid those dates with Ruth's carbon copies. 10 of her 12 discrepancy forms fell within 2 days of a reused ticket. He added the door and freight elevator records. On 8 of those occasions, Kessler's personal badge moved through the evidence cage before a Northline invoice claimed the same boxes had remained continuously off-site. Sykes's credential appeared on the other 2. No single column proved a crime. Together, they described a repeating operation. Boxes returned to the annex without electronic entries. Their seals were broken or replaced. Northline billed the county as if the property had never left its warehouse. Kessler certified the inventory totals, and Sykes approved payment. The county had paid nearly $2 million under the contract. Malcolm felt the old urge to work through the night until every number submitted. His left hand cramped before sunset, and the pen slipped from his fingers. This time he stopped. He documented the unfinished range, handed it to his partner, and called Amina before leaving the office. She was preparing signs for a school literacy night at their dining table. Malcolm helped by holding the cardboard flat with his uninjured forearm while she wrote. "Did you find it?" she asked. "We found a pattern. Not the final proof. That sounds different from how you used to answer. I used to call a pattern proof when I was tired enough." Amina smiled without looking up. The small acknowledgement mattered more than the headlines Malcolm still refused to read. The next morning, Northline produced a contractor payment ledger under protest. It showed recurring payments to the Marlow Tactical Readiness Association for warehouse security instruction. Kessler appeared in the attached vendor forms as the association's lead instructor. Each payment stayed just below the amount requiring separate disclosure to the county ethics office. The payments did not automatically constitute kickbacks. Officers could lawfully teach outside courses with approval, and Kessler's union attorney said the association had trained private guards for years, but the timing carried weight. 11 payments followed within 10 days of Kessler certifying Northline invoices supported by reused scale tickets. Sykes had signed Kessler's outside employment approvals. Attorney General Roswell referred the payment pattern to the State Public Integrity Unit while keeping the contract audit separate. That separation protected both matters from the claim that Malcolm was using an audit to conduct a criminal search. It also slowed access to records. Investigators would need warrants or grand jury process for private banking information the audit could not demand. Kessler used the delay. His union filed for an emergency order to bar Malcolm from interviewing witnesses, arguing that his civil claim against the county created a personal conflict. Northline sought to quash the subpoena for its payment ledger. Deputy Chief Sykes announced that Ruth's leave would become unpaid while the county investigated whether she had stolen official forms. The pressure reached Cross next. He was removed from oversight of the annex because county leadership claimed his cooperation with state council made him a potential witness. Before surrendering his temporary access, he completed a formal preservation transfer, placing the 3 gray boxes under a state and county dual seal. The move protected the boxes but cost Cross his command assignment. The emergency hearing, the judge declined to stop the audit. She did, however, temporarily prohibit Malcolm from questioning Marlowe employees until the state adopted a conflict screen. County council called the ruling a victory outside the courthouse. Malcolm returned to the conference room where the reconciliation covered one wall. The pattern was now visible enough for anyone to understand. Dates, badges, seals, tickets, approvals, payments. What remained missing was the one fact Kessler's defense could still exploit. He could claim he trusted Northline's figures, lent his badge during transfers, and received lawful teaching fees without knowing any ticket was false. Ruth stood beside the wall with her attorney. "He knew those boxes came back," she said. "You saw him sign the forms," Malcolm replied. "That proves he knew about the seal problems. It doesn't yet prove he knew Northline reused the weights." Ruth looked toward the payment column. "Then you need to make the paperwork answer a question he can't explain away." Malcolm studied the sequence again. The inflated invoices had not been approved randomly. Each one passed through Kessler before Northline paid his association. The pattern was powerful. To survive a courtroom, it would have to become a testable reconstruction rather than an accusation. The union's strongest attack did not dispute the numbers. It disputed Malcolm's right to present them. A public records request produced his early audit emails, including the message in which he warned that Kessler's certifications could jeopardize the annex promotion. The union released that sentence beside Malcolm's paired entry violation and his notice of a possible civil claim. Its statement accused him of arriving early to provoke a confrontation, then building an audit around personal revenge. Kessler repeated the argument in a televised interview. He acknowledged that Malcolm was a state employee, but said the restricted loading lane had no racial category. "I saw an unauthorized man with a locked case near active evidence," he said. "I responded to conduct, not color." He described the question about whether the state had sent Malcolm as skepticism toward the credential, not toward a black auditor. He said the force ended once identity was confirmed. To viewers who saw only the interview and Malcolm's admitted protocol breach, the defense carried enough surface logic to survive. The state ethics office imposed a conflict screen. Malcolm could design tests, explain his methodology, and testify about his own actions. But another auditor had to execute every new comparison and approve every conclusion. He would not make charging recommendations or interview Marlowe witnesses. Accepting the screen meant surrendering control of the case that had nearly cost him his life. Rejecting it would hand Kessler the argument he needed to exclude Malcolm's work entirely. Malcolm signed. At home, Amina watched him place the order beside his unfinished civil complaint. "Does this mean you drop the case against the county?" she asked. "It means I delay filing while counsel secures a tolling agreement. If I push both matters now, they'll say every audit finding is about damages. And what do you lose by waiting?" Malcolm flexed his left hand. Most sensation had returned, but prolonged writing still produced a burning line beneath the thumb. "The chance to answer them on my schedule." Amina rested her hand over his. "Then make sure waiting is your choice, not another way of disappearing inside the work." Under the conflict screen, Malcolm converted the wall of evidence into a blind reconciliation. Each source received a neutral code. The executing auditor did not see Kessler's name, Ruth's name, or the payment recipients until after matching the records. One sequence became the center of the reconstruction. Ruth's carbon copy documented box 8826 returning from Northline with a weight discrepancy and a broken red seal. Kessler signed that form. The barcode history tied the same identifier to the state photograph. His badge then opened the evidence cage before the freight elevator carried property to the loading bay. 12 days later, Kessler certified a Northline invoice claiming Box 8826 had remained off-site at a much higher billed weight. Northline's payment ledger showed a fee to Kessler's training association 8 days after the county paid that invoice. The sequence did not require a confession. It required Kessler to explain how he personally acknowledged the actual box and broken seal, then certified an incompatible storage claim. The second auditor reproduced the result without knowing whose signatures she was matching. Over the following months, the Public Integrity Unit presented the 5-source reconstruction to a state grand jury. The obstruction referral against Malcolm was formally closed. Ruth's suspension became the subject of a whistleblower retaliation proceeding, and Cross remained reassigned while the county conducted its own command review. The grand jury indicted Kessler on evidence tampering, falsification of public records, and official misconduct. Sykes was charged separately with procurement fraud and record tampering. Neither indictment decided guilt. Both men pleaded not guilty, and the court released them under conditions that barred access to the annex and contact with Ruth. Kessler's defense challenged every layer before trial. The carbon copies, it argued, were unofficial papers removed by a disgruntled clerk. The access logs proved use of a badge, not the identity of the user. The payment ledger showed lawful instructor fees. The reused scale tickets could have resulted from Northline clerical errors. Malcolm's reconstruction, the defense said, merely stacked innocent ambiguities until they looked criminal. The judge allowed the underlying records after separate custodians authenticated them, but warned prosecutors that visual correlation was not enough. At trial, they would need to establish what Kessler knew at the moment he signed each certification. Nearly 10 months after the Gunpoint detention, jury selection began in Briar Glen's public corruption court. Malcolm entered through a side door with state counsel and his second auditor. He carried no locked briefcase. Every demonstrative had been prepared from copies disclosed to the defense. Ruth waited in the witness room. Cross sat farther down the hall under subpoena. Amina had taken personal leave from school to attend. Inside the courtroom, Kessler appeared in a dark suit rather than a uniform. He watched Malcolm approach the witness stand without the disbelief he had shown beside the bronze sedan. Now he knew exactly who the black man before him was. His attorney placed a blue-sealed evidence box on the defense table and told the jury the state had built its entire theory around the wrong weight. For the first time since the indictment, Malcolm saw the shape of Kessler's final defense. The defense box was 8826. Its blue seal remained beneath the court's transparent protective wrap, and its current weight was 31 pounds. Kessler's attorney displayed a Northline scale ticket showing 842 pounds. He told the jury the state had compared an ordinary evidence box with the weight of an entire freight pallet, then transformed the obvious difference into fraud. For 2 trial days, that argument gained ground. The defense established that Northline weighed pallets rather than individual boxes. It showed that several officers had occasionally carried a supervisor's badge during crowded transfers. Ruth admitted she had stored the carbon copy book at home after Sykes ordered the old forms removed from desks. Cross acknowledged that he had not personally seen Kessler cancel Malcolm's appointment or ride the freight elevator. Each concession was true. None erased the others. When Malcolm took the stand, the prosecutor did not begin with the gun. She began with the billing method. Malcolm explained that Northline charged the county by pallet weight and storage duration. Box 8826 was one of 8 containers listed on the pallet represented by the 842-pound ticket. Did your audit ever claim that this single box weighed 842 pounds? The prosecutor asked. No. Then why does its 31-pound weight matter? Because Sergeant Kessler signed a discrepancy form confirming that Box 8826 had returned to the county annex. 12 days later, he certified an invoice stating that the full 8-box pallet, including 826, had remained continuously at Northline. The prosecutor placed Ruth's carbon copy beside the invoice. Kessler's signatures appeared on both. Malcolm then walked the jury through the reconstruction without asking them to trust his judgment. The state photograph tied box 8826 to red seal. 8826R. Ruth's form recorded that seal broken when the box returned underweight. The barcode history showed no lawful reassignment of its contents. The access log placed Kessler's badge at the cage, freight elevator, and loading door. The invoice later billed the original pallet as continuously stored. The county payment released funds, and Northline paid Kessler's training association 8 days afterward. The defense attorney rose for cross-examination. You arrived outside your authorized window, correct? Correct. Alone, contrary to your division's rule? Correct. And you had already concluded Sergeant Kessler's promotion was at risk. I had concluded inaccurate certifications could place it at risk. The attorney moved closer. You wanted him stopped. I wanted the count preserved. Because you assumed corruption. Malcolm looked toward the jury. I assumed my own judgment was not enough. That is why another auditor repeated the comparison with the names hidden. The prosecutor introduced the blind reconciliation result, already disclosed before trial. The second auditor had matched the same 5-source sequence without seeing Kessler's identity or the training payments until after the records aligned. The defense tried one final explanation. Kessler could have signed Ruth's form without reading the box number, and later trusted Northline's invoice without reviewing its attachments. Negligence, the attorney argued, was not knowing falsification. That defense failed against the physical sequence. Ruth testified that Kessler stopped the recount and wrote the instruction to reseal 8,826 without entering a replacement number. Cross-authenticated Kessler's loading bay order to move the remaining boxes after Malcolm was already cuffed. The vendor custodians established that the visitor appointment was cancelled from a supervisory terminal while the transfer continued. Malcolm did not claim those facts identified the person behind every keyboard. He showed what they established together. Kessler knew the box had returned. He knew its seal history was incomplete. He certified that it remained off-site. Then, when the auditor arrived early enough to see the movement, Kessler ignored open state credentials, dismissed Ruth's verification, forced Malcolm onto a car at gunpoint, and converted the delay into a trespass report. The corruption explained why Kessler needed time. His treatment of Malcolm explained why he believed he could take it. During closing arguments, the prosecutor never suggested that state office made Malcolm more deserving of safety. She reminded the jury that the detention was unlawful before the Attorney General called. The call merely prevented Kessler's first report from becoming the only record. The jury deliberated through the afternoon and returned the next morning. Kessler stood beside his attorneys while the clerk read the verdicts. Guilty of falsifying public records. Guilty of evidence tampering. Guilty of official misconduct for using police authority to obstruct the audit and support the false detention narrative. The jury acquitted him of one theft-related count tied solely to an instructor payment, finding the state had not proved that particular fee was criminal beyond a reasonable doubt. There was no applause. The judge revoked Kessler's authority to possess a service weapon, continued his release under stricter conditions, and scheduled sentencing after a presentence investigation. His certification case, civil liability, and employment status remained for other forums. Outside the courtroom, reporters called Malcolm's name. 10 months earlier, he would have stepped to the microphones alone and tried to control every word. He waited for Ruth, Cross, the second auditor, and Amina to join him. Then Malcolm said the verdict had not transformed one phone call into justice. It had shown what could happen when separate people preserved separate pieces long enough for the truth to survive challenge. 6 weeks after the verdict, Kessler returned for sentencing. The judge considered his lack of prior convictions, the danger created by tampering with police evidence, and his use of a firearm and official authority to obstruct a lawful audit. She imposed a 3-year sentence, with the final year suspended under supervised release, and ordered restitution connected to the falsified contract payments. While his appeal remained pending, the State Certification Board permanently revoked his peace officer license. Marlow County terminated Kessler after the conviction. The union preserved his right to challenge the process but withdrew its demand for reinstatement once the certification decision became final. Sykes's case followed a separate path. He pleaded guilty to procurement fraud and tampering with county records after prosecutors dismissed a more serious conspiracy count they could not independently prove. He resigned, surrendered his pension enhancement, accepted a period of home confinement followed by probation, and was barred from public contracting or government employment. Northline lost the contract. A civil judgment required repayment of inflated charges and transfer of every remaining box to an audited facility. One manager entered a limited plea for submitting altered scale documents. Other employees were not charged without proof of knowledge. The 3 gray boxes remained under state custody until their underlying criminal cases permitted lawful inventory review. Their contents were never used to punish defendants for the county's handling failures. Courts assigned independent counsel, where chain of custody questions affected pending prosecutions, and several cases required new hearings rather than automatic dismissal. Ruth's carbon copy book stayed with the state evidence custodian through trial and was returned only after certified copies entered the permanent audit record. Her retaliation case ended in reinstatement, back pay, and removal of the theft allegation from her personnel file. Ruth worked at the annex for 4 more months, long enough to help train a new civilian evidence team, then accepted a records compliance position with the state ombudsman. She told Malcolm she had no desire to spend retirement teaching frightened clerks how to hide copies in their homes. Cross was restored to command duty after the county review found that he had followed the preservation order and properly disclosed the access problem. Several officers resented him for cooperating, while others began bringing him irregularities they had kept quiet. He accepted both reactions as the cost of making the reporting system useful. The county's civilian oversight panel completed its review of Malcolm's detention after the criminal trial. It found that Kessler had ignored visible credentials, rejected Ruth's verification, and treated Malcolm's professional status as inherently implausible before any reasonable authentication attempt. The panel sustained findings of excessive force, racial bias, unlawful detention, and false reporting. The 2 loading bay officers received lesser discipline for repeating claims they had not personally observed and completed remedial reporting training. Malcolm and the county resolved his civil case the following year. The settlement included compensation without a confidentiality clause, reimbursement for medical care, a public correction of the original union-supported narrative, and enforceable audit reforms. Malcolm rejected a ceremonial apology inside the annex. He asked that the county present the correction at an open meeting where the original accusations had been discussed. The reforms replaced shared supervisory logins with individual credentials and secondary approval for deleted visitor records. Evidence seals could not be replaced without a clerk's independent signature. Freight movements required 2 badges from different reporting lines. Storage vendors submitted scale data directly from certified systems, and payment could not issue until an auditor outside the police chain matched the inventory. The county also changed how officers handled disputed government credentials. Verification had to begin before force, when no immediate threat existed, and the officer initiating a detention could no longer control the verification call. Annual racial bias review examined not only slurs or complaints, but also whose authority officers repeatedly treated as unbelievable. Attorney General Roswell resisted requests to describe her phone call as the moment the system corrected itself. At the public reform meeting, she said the call had stopped one immediate danger and preserved jurisdiction. Ruth's paper records, Cross's custody decisions, the vendor's logs, the second auditor's blind test, and Malcolm's willingness to admit his own mistake had made accountability possible. Malcolm's left thumb never returned completely to normal. Cold mornings still brought a faint burning sensation, and he used voice notes when long writing sessions tightened his wrist. A therapist helped him separate caution from surrender. For months, the sound of a freight cart behind him made his shoulders lock before his mind understood why. Amina attended several sessions with him. Their marriage did not heal through one conversation. It improved through smaller disclosures. Malcolm sharing a troubling message before investigating it, naming where he would be, taking a partner, and admitting when he was afraid. Amina stopped learning about his risks from reporters at her front door. The State Audit Division formally disciplined Malcolm for the paired entry violation, but restored him to full field status after he completed safety review. The finding remained in his file alongside commendations for the reconciliation method. He declined an offered administrative promotion that would have kept him behind a desk. Instead, he proposed a rotating field team that paired senior auditors with younger staff and gave confidential sources a direct protection plan before site visits. More than a year after Kessler forced him onto the bronze sedan, Malcolm returned to the reopened Briar Glen Evidence Annex. The loading lane had been repainted, the visitor terminal replaced, and the glass desk staffed by 2 civilian clerks. A younger black auditor stood beside him, carrying the inventory tablet. Malcolm carried nothing locked. They entered their separate credentials, watched the screen display both names, and waited while an independent custodian answered the verification call. Only after both devices sounded did Malcolm nod to his partner and step with her through the reopened annex door.